The subject of today's hearing is the fiscal year 2025 budget request for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Nobody is looking forward to what I might make up for an opening statement, so we're going to skip that.
Funding is appropriated to CBP, and then they pass it through to FEMA.
Oh, so the entire amount is passed through?
Yes.
Okay, so a little federal shell game here. Okay, and I hope the next administration takes people like yourself who are lobbying Congress actively through their communications office and actually prosecutes them under the Deficiency Act. I yield back.
DHS conducted 18 audits over the past 4 years that identified overpayments, ineligible payments, unsupported and unallowable costs totaling approximately $3.9 billion in improper payments.
We take any concerns about fraudulent use of our programs very seriously, and we appreciate the partnership that we have with the Inspector General's office.
The subject of today's hearing is the fiscal year 2025 budget request for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I know for those of you committee veterans, which is everybody but me, it's traditional to give an opening statement at this point in time. And as the newest member of the committee, I'm sure that nobody is looking forward to what I might make up for an opening statement, so we're going to skip that.
Is there any support for public safety agencies to enhance their communications interoperability?
Thank you, Congressman Newhouse. You know, we have a suite of grant programs that are designed to assist communities build their capacity in communications. Having been a firefighter myself, I understand the importance of being able to have the interoperable communications to be able to respond regionally to different events. The grant programs that we have through the Homeland Security Grant Program Suite, whether it's our UASI program or the Homeland Security Program, those are all eligible expenses for communities to utilize that funding to help increase the level of capacity needed. I am not familiar with the grant program that you mentioned. I would assume as we were consolidating grants in the past in our Homeland Security Suite that it was included as part of that as an eligible expense. I'm certainly happy to get back to you with more information on that. But I think the key towards the end of your question is really how do we build this capacity for state and local public safety workers to include our emergency managers.
I'm going to ask about the Shelter and Services Program, which is administered by FEMA in partnership with CBP. So my first question is it funded through FEMA or through CBP or through both or what?
The funding is appropriated to CBP and then they pass it through to FEMA.
Oh, so the entire amount is passed through?
Yes.
Okay, so a little federal shell game here. Okay, because it says in your statement that FEMA's mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters. So do you consider the southern border a disaster?
I am not an immigration expert, Congressman. My role in this is to administer the SSP program as directed by Congress to support jurisdictions that are experiencing costs to support this.
Right, so you didn't answer my question. Do you consider the southern border to be a disaster? Because otherwise it would be inconsistent with FEMA's mission, because your mission says you're supposed to deal with disasters.
FEMA's mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters, but we also have a great level of technical capability to provide assistance and technical assistance to solve many different problems that are out
but
there.
that exists in the entire government. I mean, believe me, grants are administered in the entire government. Your agency is the only one that administers local grants. So I'm just curious to what rocket scientist made the decision to actually put a border issue into FEMA, because my people, I represent the low-lying Eastern Shore of Maryland. I want to thank you, by the way, for the work you're doing with Criswell on resiliency. They think of disasters as something that's not man-made. I think most people would agree that the southern border disaster is a man-made disaster made by the person in the White House, a mile down Pennsylvania Avenue here. And I think it dilutes FEMA. There's also $340 million in what's called $340 million to the Shelter and Services Program competitive grant programs to be allocated for the end of this fiscal year. So is that going to NGOs?
So the SSP program, FEMA administers as directed by Congress to provide funding to support communities and nonprofit organizations that are experiencing costs to support migration. It has always been intended that when Congress directed it to be changed it to
I'm talking about the
SSP.
grant program, because I'm assuming that the 300 million that goes to communities is different from the 340 million. That's what your press release, I mean, this is your press release.
yes.
So I'm asking specifically about the grant program.
The grant program was always intended to be a competitive grant program when it turned from ESFP-H to the SSP program. However, with the late appropriation, we had determined we needed to do a direct allocation to get money into the hands of organizations that were experiencing costs. While we stood up the competitive program, it will be a competitive program going forward. Any jurisdiction would be eligible that has costs that
And
they are.
when you mean organizations, you mean jurisdictions.
It can be a city, it can be a nonprofit organization.
Okay, so if you get the information on who are the largest recipients, I'd appreciate that. Now, my real concern is in the last line of this press release, because this is characteristic across the administration. You're aware that we have limitation amendments in all the appropriations bills that prohibit lobbying Congress. Is that right? So your line that says DHS continues to call on Congress to pass the bipartisan border security agreement, you don't consider that lobbying? Putting that in a press release? I mean, this is a press release from your agency, right? You're aware of the limitation amendment. It says you are not to lobby Congress, to spend taxpayer dollars to lobby Congress, and it says DHS continues to call on Congress. Now, I don't know, call on sounds like a synonym for lobbying. I don't know, maybe not. To pass the bipartisan border security agreement. Is it your opinion that is not lobbying?
It is my opinion that is not lobbying.
And why is it your opinion that that calling on Congress to do something is not lobbying? I'm a member of Congress and I'm reading this.
Yeah.
How is that not lobbying me?
Sir, we call on you to pass the budget at the same time, right? These are acts that we know will make a difference in supporting these communities, your jurisdictions, your communities.
Believe me, on this side of the dais, we fully understand what lobbying is. We fully understand what this administration is attempting to do. We fully understand that the border is a disaster, but it's a man-made disaster. And honestly, I think this administration is skirting the lobbying restriction, and I hope the next administration takes people like yourself who are lobbying Congress actively through their communications office and actually prosecutes them under the Deficiency Act. I yield back.
FEMA also has a significant counterterrorism mission also, is that correct?
We have some counterterrorism grants that we provide and support that.
Okay, good. So in other words, FEMA's mission has long been beyond natural disasters also.
FEMA's mission has always been to help solve some of our nation's toughest problems, regardless of the cause of those problems.
Sometimes some of the issues are not resolved for over a year. Many of the things that people are waiting for to help rebuild communities and so forth. So just would like some clarification as to the direction that you're taking the agency.
So we recently did a reorganization of the resilience side of FEMA, and that's the side of our agency that focuses on the before, helping people build more resilient communities through our mitigation projects or through individual preparedness or educating communities on what's in the realm of possibility. I think as we see the increase in the number of severe weather events and the cost of these events that these communities are experiencing, we want to make sure that we are lifting up all of the work that FEMA does before to help communities become stronger, because every dollar that we invest in mitigation saves $6 in the response and the recovery costs. And so as we form an Office of Climate Adaptation, it's really focused on helping communities understand what they can do to become more resilient and withstand the impacts that these severe weather events are causing.
And there has not been a presidential declaration, emergency declaration related to the border?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of either. Do you understand why? If FEMA's involved, it seemed like we must think it's a disaster of some sort or some sort of emergency.
Yeah, FEMA's role in the border is specifically to administer the grant as directed by Congress, which is the Shelter and Services Program grant. And our grant preparedness directorate that administers all of our grants, who are experts at administering grants, are doing that. And that is our role in supporting the border.
Are you all working with anyone to try and, address the supply chain issue on these big transformers?
Congressman Rutherford, I know we have had this conversation before, and, I appreciate your continued concern. After you first raised this, we had conducted a supply chain analysis specifically to look at transformers, as well as other supply chain shortfalls that we might experience going into that hurricane season. I believe this was 2 years ago that we first had this conversation. I think as we talked about at the time, there wasn't an issue going into the year, but if there were a large number that were used, we potentially would see an impact going forward. As we continue to go into this hurricane season, we are not seeing an impact to our ability to respond to this hurricane season, although we do continue to work with our private sector partners to monitor this because we want to make sure.
Could I interrupt and
Yeah,
ask,
please.
what are the stockpiles looking like?
So we do not have stockpiles. FEMA does not maintain
on your-
stockpiles for transformers. We work with our
No, but I mean
private sector
industry,
entities.
Yeah. Private industry, do you know what they have? Has anybody assessed that?
That would be probably fall more within the Department of Energy that would need to understand that. Our goal, during a disaster response is to stabilize the energy infrastructure, and we do that a number of ways through generators, as we had talked about, helping the private sector repair and giving them access to the damaged
So
power
is
lines.
FEMA, so am I hearing you say then that FEMA is kind of reliant on energy to take care of the supply issue on these transformers and all?
Yeah, FEMA does not have a role in ensuring that the private industry has a supply of them, but we do want to understand what they think their impacts are going to be.
When you talk about process, if FEMA awarded the grant funding in the first place to establish the program, why should CBP have to, or CPB rather, now have to run every grant through FEMA granting authorities? I think, could there be a better solution there in terms of streamlining that process to make sure that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I did get an update on this situation here recently, and there are some challenges with how this program is being administered, and so we are working hard right now to figure out the best way to streamline that. Because being able to have the appropriate funding to enable the next generation warning system is really critical to protecting our citizens. So we are aware of the challenges, and we are working on them, and we're happy to provide you an update on where we're at.
There's a number of payments that were made, millions and millions of dollars, but we're unable to find the details about what programs or projects or funds they went toward. I would love to see accounting on who's receiving these grants. Can you provide that to us?
Yeah, I believe we should be able to provide you whatever level of detail you need on that first program, the ESFP humanitarian program, which is now the SSP program.
Yeah, we've looked through the websites and can't find anything.
I don't think we would have it on our public-facing website, but I'll be happy to have the team get with your staff and provide you a briefing on where the money has gone.
Thank you. FEMA's use of resources for non-natural disasters has revealed that FEMA does not have sufficient controls in place to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. DHS conducted 18 audits over the past 4 years that identified overpayments, ineligible payments, unsupported and unallowable costs totaling approximately $3.9 billion in improper payments. That's a lot of money, at least to some of us. DHS audited and also identified an additional $45.4 million in funds that could be put to better use. What are you doing to work on controls that could keep us from, taxpayer dollar going to waste, fraud, and abuse?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we take any concerns about fraudulent use of our programs very seriously, and we appreciate the partnership that we have with the Inspector General's office. Specifically, one of the items that was raised in there was regarding our lost wages program, and that is, a program that was directed under the previous administration to support individuals that were impacted by COVID-19. And in that program, it was directed that self-certification be done at the state level. And that is where I think the majority of the issues that the IG found within that report. This is a program that was not necessarily designed to be part of FEMA's programs. It's not something that we've done in the past, not something I certainly ever want to do again. But we do have, for our traditional programs, the appropriate level of controls in place to ensure that the funding is going to where it needs to be.
Could you describe how FEMA can maybe work better with other agencies going forward to become more unified in response to these disasters while also working to ease that paperwork burden on our survivors?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I'll start with is we recently released an interim final rule to how we administer our individual assistance program. And one of the things that we continue to have heard is the frustration with having to apply for an SBA loan, get denied, and then come to FEMA to get assistance. And so part of this new release is we have decoupled that, so we make it easier and have ease the burden on the individual. Now they can either apply for both simultaneously or just go through the FEMA program. And we think that's also a step in the right direction to really help understand what the customer experience is and making sure that we're making it easy as possible for them. But we continue to work with our partners also at SBA to create a unified, universal application. And we have been having ongoing discussions at the staff level on the best way to do that. Working through login.gov is one of the primary tools and platforms that we would be able to use. And so this is definitely something that we continue to work towards. We are not there yet.
So with that, thank you very much, Madam Administrator, and we're adjourned.